Next, let's move on to marking a to-do as completed. That will be done inside the partial, which contains the checkbox to mark a task as completed. If we take a look at the route one more time, the route to mark a to-do as completed is a patch route. So we need to make a patch request, and we can do that using the htmx patch attribute. Then we need to specify the endpoint to send the request to, which is going to be /task/ the ID of the task we want to mark as completed. Then also we need to specify a target. Remember, by default, htmx will use the element that triggers the request as the target, which is this, and that is not what we want. So the target in this case is going to be the whole role. And since we are going to have multiple roles representing each to-do, so we need a way to uniquely identify each role. And we can do that by giving each role an ID and appending the ID of each task to the name, then the ID of the task. So the first role is going to be task 1, then the next task 2, and so on. I'm going to move this inside a variable because I know I'll be reusing it, and I can easily set a variable using the set tag. I'm going to call it task ID, and the value is going to be this. So now I can use the task ID here. So if I save and refresh, and if we inspect each role, you see that they now have a unique ID. Next, we are going to set the target to the ID. Then we will also specify the swap method to be outer HTML, which will replace the entire target with the returned content. Next, we are going to check the checkbox if a task has been completed. So we are going to have a ternary operator. If a task is completed, the checkbox is going to be checked. Otherwise, it's not going to be checked. Then lastly, we need to update the title also to be striked out once it is marked as completed. First, let me wrap this in a div. Then I'll add a class. Again, I'm going to make use of a ternary operator. So if the task has been completed, then we are going to add a class of line true. Otherwise, we won't add any class. Let's see how this looks in the browser. No difference yet because we haven't marked any task as completed. Now let's move on to the backend side of things. First, I'm going to pull in params, request, and view from the context. Then first, we need to get the task that we want to mark as completed. Await task, find or fail. Then we'll pass in the ID of the task, which we will get from params. Then we can mark the task as completed by setting is completed to the value of the checkbox. So that is request input. Remember, we gave the input field a name of completed. So we'll use that here. Because by default, this will return a string. That is why we are casting it to a boolean. Then we can persist the change to the database. Then lastly, we need to return a view. So just as we did in the store method, we're also going to return the task partial. Now, task here is going to be the completed task. Let's write in the browser. Let's say we want to mark this task as completed. It doesn't seem to do anything. Let me open the network tab and retry. So we are getting that error we got earlier, which is invalid CSRF token exception. In the lesson where we are creating to-dos, I showed you one way to resolve this, and I mentioned that there are two ways. So in this lesson, I will show you the other way to resolve this issue. The other way is to make use of htmx events. If you take a look at the event documentation again, amongst the list of events that htmx fires, there's a config request event, which is the one we are interested in. And this event is triggered before the request, and which allows us to customize parameters and headers. So what we want to do is, before sending a request, we want to set a particular header, which is the X CSRF token header, which AdonisJS expects. So that way we don't need to add the CSRF token field to a form. Let's head over to VS Code and implement that. I'm going to do that inside the layout file. Just before closing of the body tag, I'm going to add a script. Then I'll add an event listener. And the event that we want to listen for is the htmx config request event. Then we're going to specify a callback which takes the event that is fired. Then we can use the event. Then we want to set the headers. And the header we want to set is xcsrf token header. And we're going to set the value to be the CSRF token. And we can get that using the CSRF token global. And this needs to be a string. If we head back and refresh, before sending the request, let's inspect the HTML. So this is the script we just added. And this is where we are setting the xcsrf token header to contain the CSRF token. Now let's mark this task as completed, and everything should work as expected. As you can see, we got a successful response, and because the task has been marked as completed, the checkbox remained checked and the task has been striked out. Of course, we can mark it as incompleted. To wrap up this lesson, since we now have a way to automatically add the CSRF token, we don't need this anymore. So we can get rid of that, and everything should still work as before.